Shortly after President Trump's election, North Korea announced their intentions to test a medium-range ballistic missile, to which Trump famously proclaimed that won't happen. Well, it has. They somehow managed to scrape together enough duct tape and rubber bands to get this missile working.
I guess they didn't read his Twitter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. They should, right, and they tested it. It went about got about 300 miles in height, 500 miles in distance, and landed in the Sea of Japan. This is going to be very, very interesting. It's going to be a test of how well can Donald Trump deal with this, emerging nuclear power, in a very, complicated geopolitical region. Because not only do you have to worry about, what North Korea is going to do, but you have to look at, South Korea with Japan, with China. Um, he's recently met with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan, and he has said that he backs Japan 100% in this, which I would expect the president to do, really, no matter which U.S. president they are. It's just,
Well, there was like some question with him, but thankfully he didn't go
yeah,
full retard.
yeah, right. Um, but there has been no statement so far by China. This is the missing piece of the puzzle because it seems like I'm not sure if Trump necessarily really understands geopolitics. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure he doesn't. It's very different than real estate. I'm sure real estate's complicated. It's complicated. It's not an easy industry to be in. But geopolitics is a whole nother matter. You don't have nuclear weapons in real estate, and if you are, I'm not sure what kind of real estate you're doing. But you don't have
Well,
that.
Trump vodka is very complicated.
Yeah, right, right. Um, so the thing is, though, like, really the only people that could restrain North Korea is the People's Republic of China. But they don't necessarily want to do that because they don't want the possibility of having, a U.S. ally like South Korea or a unified Korea that would allow American troops to be at the Chinese border. China has a history of, being subject to these very disastrous invasions. And while I think most people in the United States would think the idea of, American forces entering China is completely ridiculous, I mean, if you know anything about military history, it would not work out well for us. From the Chinese perspective, they don't really trust us not to do that, and I can't really blame them. So,
You can't blame him at this point.
eh, so that's going to be interesting. If he's going to, talk tough on China, what's going to happen when China is holding North Korea as this bargaining chip? And are they really even holding them as that much of a bargaining chip? I mean, how much control do they have over North Korea in the first place? I know they do a lot of trade and a lot of aid, but can they leverage that into actually, manipulating North Korea to do what they want?
But was the test completely successful?
Yes, the test was successful. The missile took off, launched, landed in the ocean. Everything went right. They've been getting better about their missiles. Now, could they get this missile to have 500 kilometers? Could they get this 4,000 kilometers to hit American bases in Guam? Maybe, but they could clearly hit American bases in Japan. And the other part where this comes in too is if Trump wants to do his thing where he's going to have American allies start paying more for their fair share of defense of their regions instead of just basing American forces throughout the world, what happens then if Japan really starts to rebuild its military into high gear again? You have to remember that in East Asia the wounds of World War II still run very, very deep, same as they do in Eastern Europe. Much more so than in the United States. These are countries where there are millions of people alive today who still remember this and still remember what Japanese fascism did to them. And in Japan, they still remember it too. I mean, they don't like to talk about it like Germans do, but they very well remember what this is and what happened to them and what a shame it created for their country. And they're really not going to be able to live that down. I mean, it's
Well,
not.
there is a somewhat of a rise of nationalism in Japan,
There is.
but I think there's one kind of fundamental aspect of human psychology is that having a common enemy is a very unifying force. So if there's a more aggressive China and a more aggressive North Korea, then South Korea might, not be as nervous or as preoccupied with the threat of a militarized Japan.
That is true, but it makes me nervous. For me, it's like, I mean, it's obviously not good that there are all these American forces in Japan, that America is having to subsidize Japan's defense. That comes, American taxpayers have to foot that bill, Japanese taxpayers have to fit some of that bill. But then at the same time, though, that is it worth kind of taking the foot off, proverbially speaking, and then having like a remilitarized Japan and looking at the potential fallout of other countries, starting this arms race in East Asia, and I think that's a very dangerous possibility. I don't think the Japanese are ever going to acquire nuclear ability. I mean, they have, nuclear power plants. They have the ability to build a nuclear program within 100 days if they wanted to. But, I mean, you're talking about the only country that's ever been attacked with nuclear weapons. I don't think they're going to go that far. It's just, I think it would be anathema to them, or anathema, however you say it, for them to do something like that. So it's a very, very complicated and tricky situation, and I don't think the current U.S. administration really has any idea of what to do about this. Like how, like you want to, you want to work out these better deals with China. You want to stick to the Chinese, but you also want to, stick it to North Korea, and you also want to, have Japan like pay for like more of their defense, and you have to kind of narrow this down into more actionable geopolitical objectives. And I just don't think he's going to do that. I think he's going to try for all three, and I think he's going to get none of those three. What do you think?
I don't see really a clear kind of geopolitical kind of maneuver here, aside from reassuring the allies. There is no,
Yeah.
because, with all the pressure China allegedly put on North Korea, nothing happened. They don't give a shit. And in this case, I mean, so it's just kind of the hope is not for some kind of geopolitical genius, but for kind of not going full retard and still reaffirming uh, political, regional allies
Yeah.
in South Korea and Japan, and that's something that they would be able to do. Aside from that, I mean, they already have the nukes, they have some missiles, and short of war, it's not clear what you can do.
That is true. And war with North Korea would be, oh, buddy,
Yeah.
that's not something you want. I mean, I've looked at the scenarios that like Rand Corporation and other defense intelligence things have published, and it would not be pretty. I mean, even if American forces and allied forces were able to win, it's not a victory that you're going to want. I mean, even if no atomic weapons were used, I mean, you're still talking unbelievable economic devastation, unbelievable losses of human life. It's for really very little good objectives. And then you have a situation where now you have American forces, if they win, on the Chinese border, and now what happens? It's a very, and then the whole thing of like unifying the Koreas and taking this country that's been communist for 60 years and taking these people that have like no that have really no like ways or means of accommodating themselves to a modern society, and then working that back into South Korea. I mean, I don't. It would be a mess, honestly. The best thing to do is probably some sort of deterrence, some sort of detente. I don't think they're ever going to give up their nuclear program. I really don't. It basically is a guarantee of their sovereignty. They've seen what happened to other U.S. rivals that didn't have nuclear weapons. They saw what happened to Iraq. They saw what happened to Libya. They've seen what's happened to Syria. Um, and I don't think the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or the Kim family are stupid enough to give up their atomic weapons program in the face of something like this. I think they're going to be keeping it.
But one of the interesting aspects of this Trump idea that all the allies that are de facto protected by America should pay their fair share.
Mhm.
One of the interesting aspects of it is that, let's say that weren't the case, and then you would have more military powers, and then potentially more global instability as a result of it. So it's almost kind of geopolitically beneficial to just have America, foot the bill to a large degree, but reducing also the threat of a more militarized Japan and South Korea.
See, that's where I feel conflicted about it. It's the thing of like you want to reduce America's military commitments. You don't want the United States getting dragged into like another world war over something like an archduke getting assassinated or something very small leading to this massive conflagration.
Or Ivanka's clothes being pulled from some German retailer.
Right.
Yeah.
Something like that. You want to avoid that. But on the same time, like, you're looking at parts of the world like, Europe and East Asia, where there are these rivalries between these powerful countries that go back hundreds of years. And you're talking about these extremely powerful countries. People talk about, like, let's take NATO, for example, the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance. This alliance ostensibly has two purposes. Purpose number one, keep the United States in. Purpose number two, keep the Russians out. But there's another purpose that people don't really talk about that, and that's keeping the Germans down. It's so that there was always this tension in Europe because militarized and politically powerful Germany upset the traditional power balance that there was between France and between France and Britain and Russia and all these other the great powers.
Even after the Cold War, when it was reunifying, there was a lot of concern about that.
Yeah, right. So that's the thing. What happens if the Bundeswehr, that's the federal defense, that's what the Germans call their military. If they start buying tanks again, if they start buying planes again, if they start really like becoming powerful again. And frankly, I think like if you look at Poland, they've considered this possibility. They have the very unfortunate geographic situation of being located right between Germany and Russia. They're the biggest land. I'm fairly certain they're the biggest land army in Europe right now, as far as their actual combat-capable forces. The Russian army has more reserves, but as far as actual if there's a war today, who can fight? It's Poland. So I think they're not discounting this possibility. So for me, it's this dilemma of there's risks if there is this American commitment, but if there's not, I mean, it's opening the door for a lot of things, and I think it's kind of naive to think that there can never be another great power war in Europe again. I mean, these are, geography doesn't change. Geography does not change. You still have these powerful countries. They don't have these big, far-flung empires like they did anymore. They don't have as much of these, crazy political ideologies like communism and fascism as they did then. I mean, they still have them, but not like it was back then, thank God. So it's not as much of a risk, but it is.
Well, the biggest factor that serves as an insurance policy is the fact that these countries have become more democratic, and when there is democracy, the natural kind of pool of the population is more isolationist. Even recently, the polls in Italy and Germany showed that the majority of them wouldn't want to fight Russia if it wanted to invade Estonia.
That's true.
So that's the biggest equation that changed. The biggest part of the equation that changed.
That is true. So, I guess in the situation of South Korea and Japan, I think he might try to get them to spend more of their GDP on defense. I don't think he's going to seriously make any major withdrawals of American forces from those countries, and I think he should start recognizing now that North Korea is not giving up their nuclear weapons program. It's foolish to make them try. They know what happens if they do it. We're not going to be able to convince them otherwise. And frankly, I mean, the only way that regime is going to change is if that change comes from within. Even then, it's going to be a horrible mess. Maybe even a civil war, maybe a coup.
I mean, well, it's Chinese involvement.
Or that possibly too. But either way, you're looking at a big.
You'd have one part of the power structure appeal to China to bring order or stability. Could be.
That is a possibility too. So it's a big risk. And I think the safest thing to do is honestly to just maybe keep the sanctions. Maybe keep saber rattling if they launch another missile. Be like, don't you do that. But don't really press for regime change, because that's letting the genie out of the bottle, and that is a shit genie. You do not want that genie, dude.
Well, it's an awkward situation where you don't want to commit. On the other hand, you don't want to be completely absentee. So it just sort of, you kind of get into Obama's Syria, where there's constant diplomatic efforts and you just look weak. So that's the problem for the States, where America's constantly, John Kerry's flying around, getting his Delta miles, but another conference with,
another conference with Lavrov.
Yeah,
go anywhere.
With the Russian foreign, minister. It's almost like they would, like a circle jerk would be a more productive way to spend their time. Right. So
yeah, that's the thing with that. It's worth watching. Keep watching it. Familiarize yourself with North Korea and with how their government works and the history of that government. Read stories from defectors, and just try to be knowledgeable about it, and I suppose be prepared for any eventuality.
Yeah,
that's all we got on that. Take care, y'all.